All right. So like I said, what we're going to start studying, and we'll just get right into it, is human growth and development. Now, I can't remember if it's on the slide or not. All right. So this is actually one of my favorite subjects to teach, just because, well, you'll find out I really like talking about kids and especially babies. I don't know why, they're just cool. And so, but what we're going to talk about, what differentiates human development and the study of human, also known as developmental psychology, from all of the other types of psychologies, is that what we're talking about in all of the other types of research we do in psychology, we're usually just taking a snapshot in time, okay, with different age groups, sometimes with different types of people, all those kinds of things, but it's kind of at one moment in time, okay? What makes human development, the study of human development, unique is we're looking at how people change over time. And so we're going to see how people change and how we evolve through the lifespan, okay? And I'll tell you, this type of course, we do have a full course on this. It's offered in spring. It's called Psych 240, Human Growth and Development. And if you are in the field of psychology, social work, I would highly recommend taking the course. If anyone in here, I don't have my list with me. If there's anyone here doing the pre-nursing program, nurses are required to take a human growth and development course as well in most programs. I know NAU, U of A, PIMA, and I can't remember if NAU even has a nursing program, but all of the ones that I'm aware of, they require taking human growth and development. So it's a good opportunity to get that out of the way if you're interested in the nursing or any of the health fields. So just so everybody knows, that's on the schedule for this coming spring. And I'll tell you, when I did clinical work, in my desk, you'd think I would keep, yes, of course you have the diagnostic manuals and whatnot, but you'd think I would have my counseling books in there, but I didn't. I usually had my diagnostic manual and I had a human growth and development book, because those were the most valuable resources depending on the age and who I was working with at the time. So it's a kind of a cool subject, and it's kind of fun to talk about. So let's go on. All right. So again, this is about the study of change over time. And we will see that due to some historical issues, most of developmental psychology has focused on individuals between the age of 0 to 18, because for pretty much centuries, it was assumed that once a person hit the age of 18, we stop developing, that we have all of our intelligence, we have all of our personality, we have all of our physical aspects of our life, and that we don't change after the age of 18. But as this suggests, over about the last 30 years or so, we've come to realize that we do continue to develop after the age of 18. And probably the reasons why we've started to realize that we continue to develop across the lifespan is over about the last 120 years, our lifespan has about doubled, okay? Back when we started studying development, the average lifespan was between the age of about 30 to 40 years old. That's how old, that was the age of expiration, as you would say. And so there wasn't much after the age of 18 to really look at, because after 18, you were only expected to live another 12 to 18 years. But over about the last 120 years, due to advances in medicine, due to advances in technologies such as sanitation programs and stuff like that, we've doubled pretty much our lifespan, okay? And in fact, there's many theorists who argue that we actually live two lives. We live about 0 to 40, and then there's almost like this restart period at the age of 40 to the rest of our life period. And what I mean by that is if we look at individuals between the age of about 35 to 45, this is where we see work turnover rates really high. We see this is usually the highest divorce rate in the nation. This is when people start to change a lot of the ways they're living from the previous periods of their life. And so a lot have actually argued that we live two lifetimes and not just one, due to our extended life span. But we'll talk about this unique age group more because usually when we divide the life cycle up, we have 0 to 18. So that's early childhood through adolescence. And then we have young adulthood, which is about 18 to about 35. And then we have middle adulthood, which is about 30, 35 to about 50, 60 years old, okay? And traditionally, it has been middle adulthood that has been the backbone of any society. They're the ones who are raising a family. They're the ones who are maintaining the workforce. They're the ones that this traditionally was the age group when people got involved with civil activities such as volunteering or being part of their local church. But over the last several decades, this group has failed in huge ways. And I know this isn't a bleak outlook for you who are younger, okay? I'm not trying to say, oh, your life is going to be horrible. But it's this middle adult age that we're seeing the highest use of substance use, the highest use of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicines. Middle adulthood has the highest rate of job turnover and firing. This is also the age group where we see the highest level of divorce. And so when we get to middle adulthood, as we're having these conversations, we'll want to discuss why there's these changes within middle adulthood, okay? All right, so that's kind of an overview of why we don't just focus on 0 to 18 anymore. We look at the complete lifespan, but also some changes we've seen within these groups over the last 120 years. In order to kind of simplify things in the development of and other understanding of human development, we usually study within 3 domains, okay? And you'll notice that there's a Venn diagram up here because all of these areas overlap with each other. One has a cause on another and vice versa, okay? But we kind of separate them to kind of for ease of understanding, okay? The first one is biological processes. So this is how we change physically over time. And of course, in psychology, we really look at the nervous system and the brain systems to note this. And I think I might have mentioned this in the biological section. Humans are unique in our development, okay? Because we're one of the few species that is born with an underdeveloped brain, okay? What I mean by that is if we were born with our fully developed brain, with all the neurons and the nerve systems working like most species are, we would break our mother's pelvic bone as we were coming out, okay? Indeed, a lot of physiologists have argued that our brain size is at its greatest limit. We can't have larger brains anymore, okay? And one thing to know that humans don't have the largest brain. That tends to be an assumption. Elephants' brains are about 4 to 5 times larger than ours because the way we usually look at brain growth is a comparison of the brain to body mass, okay? So if you think about an elephant and how huge they are, they have to have a large enough brain to coordinate all of that movement within that larger biological system, okay? But what makes humans unique is we kind of break this mold of size of brain compared to body mass, okay? We don't have the largest brains, but we have the largest brains when we compare our brain size to our body mass. We actually have oversized brains for our body mass, okay? And and a lot have argued that that's why we have the ability to do some of the higher thinking things we do, like with mathematics and geometry and those types of things, is because we have all of this extra space that isn't dedicated to the biological systems of our body mass, okay? But what does this mean? And this is what I mean by these three things interact with each other, okay? Unlike a lot of species, our brains really develop between the age of 0 and 6. And that about 90% of our brain volume develops between this age period. So unlike other species where their brains develop within the nutrient womb of the mother completely, our brains develop in a socio-cultural area. We don't develop our brains inside the womb of our mother. Our brains develop in a socio-cultural context, okay? Which means that a lot of what we do and the way our brain develops really depends upon the environment we're in, the culture we're raised in, the family system we raised in, and that really determines the biological development of our brain, okay? And probably a good example of this is when we look at people who have severe traumatic events between 0 to adolescence, okay, is what we find is that actually stunts brain growth, okay? So let's say a young child, age of 6, has a huge traumatic event, maybe the loss of their parents or a drug induced into them, or they were molested severely by someone or physically hurt by someone. We actually find that their brain actually gets stuck in that period of time and their development is stunted, okay? When we look at adolescents, 12 to 16-year-olds, 12 to 16-year-olds, if they get heavily into drugs, again, we see their development stunted. They actually stop developing at about the age of 12 to 13, okay? I actually, she's given me permission to say this. I adopted a 13-year-old girl out of the foster care system. And during that period, she'd been in like 16 different foster houses, rejected by family, a lot of bad things that happen. She's at the age of 30 now, but her mental capacity is still around the age of about 15 to 18 years of age, okay? Because of all that trauma that occurred, her developmental period ended, okay? So that's what I mean by that. Isabel, you have your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I was speaking and I forgot my mic was up. I apologize. What I wanted to ask was, you said that they stunt their development due to their experiences, but is there a way to help regrow that again? Or once it's stunt, there's no like kind of undoing that?
That's an excellent question. And Isabel, the answer to that is yes, it is changeable. But it has to do with the time period that it is changed. So the sooner that you start working with the child after the trauma, the more likely it is they'll be able to recover their abilities. The longer they wait, the longer the person exists within that zone of trauma and stuck in that developmental phase, the less likely it is to be able to help them catch up. Okay, and probably some really good examples of this when we're talking about, for example, disorders. And we'll talk about, for example, schizophrenia when we get to the abnormal psychology section. Schizophrenia is a disorder that is associated with, for example, auditory or visual hallucinations, hearing and seeing things that are not there. Disorganized thinking, meaning that, most of us tell a story from A to B, right? Beginning to end. A lot of schizophrenics start with A and then they go to Z to D to F to B. They never really get to an end. And most of the time they end up talking about a totally different subject. And they have other issues, delusions of grandeur is a lot, those types of things. But anyways, this disorder tends to develop in the majority of people when they first leave their home. Okay. So in the context, when I ran a behavioral health center, I usually kept my calendar open after about the first 1 or 2 months of students moving into dorm centers. Now, don't worry about this, you guys, okay, unless you start experiencing symptoms, okay? Because it was always that I would have 4 to 5 students come to my office and they'd say, Dr. Peterson, I feel very paranoid. I can't think in class. I'm hearing things that are not there. I'm seeing things that everyone else isn't seeing. And that tends to be the early onset of schizophrenic symptoms, okay? And we find that it usually happens when a person leaves their home for the very first time and then they're on their own. That tends to be a trigger for schizophrenic symptoms, okay? And what we know about schizophrenia is if those symptoms are caught early and they're dealt with early, the more likely the person is to be able to live more of a normal, healthy life. The longer those symptoms go on, the more likely they'll have to be on a heavy medication or a heavy, or even inpatient or halfway house settings. Okay. Another example, and we'll get to this either this week or next week, we'll talk about attachment, and we'll talk about what are called attachment disorders. Okay, these are disorders where a person is unable to attach to another human being. They either become very overclingy and they can't leave their immediate caretaker for any reason, or they become very aggressive, meaning they act out a lot. They basically say screw you to the world, and they are very unruly, as you would say. Okay, for attachment disorders, if it's not treated before the age of 8. And people who do attachment treatment therapy is once you're at the age of 8, they cut off the therapy for attachment disorder. Because what we have found is that something occurs around the age of 8 that if the symptoms of an attachment disorder are not taken care of before then, it's going to become a life management disorder. In fact, what we find is attachment disorders fall into what's called juvenile conduct disorders. This is where a lot of individuals start aggressing towards society, start doing juvenile type crimes. And then that conduct disorder then results in what we call anti-personality disorder in adulthood, which is a large portion of offenders in prison who are there for assault reasons and whatnot. So the long answer to your question is yes, a lot of these issues are very treatable as long as they get treatment closest to when the chaos or the trauma occurred. Does that answer your question, Isabel?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome. And Linnell, I thought I did post these, but I don't think I did, but I will. She's asking to post the PowerPoint. Okay. So as we saw, again, our brains develop more in a social cultural world than the womb of a mother, the nutrient womb of a mother. That's one example of the interaction between biological and social emotional processes. Another example of where these can diverge from each other is when we start talking about adolescence, we're going to talk about 2 types of maturation. Physical maturation, which deals with puberty. It's when, puberty, for example, with females is marked by the first menstruation, right? For men and boys, and this is why most studies of puberty are done with women. For some reason, the notion of puberty of complete maturity is when a young man masturbates at the fantasy of another person. So you can imagine why most research is done using puberty with females, because I don't think there's many men who are honest about that, or boys that are honest about that, or comfortable even admitting that. So I'm bringing this up because I'll mostly be talking about females, but we see these same trends with males, okay? So that's physical maturation, and it's when we get our secondary sex traits. Believe it or not, if culture had no influence on the way we dress our children, prepubescent, if we didn't have these dress codes of women wearing different clothes than men, having different hairstyle than boys, those kinds of things, we honestly wouldn't be able to tell the difference between girls and boys. Before puberty, boys and girls are what we call androgynous. That if culture didn't give girls pink stuff and boys blue stuff, boys short haircuts, girls long hair, all those different things, we actually wouldn't be able to tell the difference between boys and girls. But it's when we go through puberty and we start seeing the secondary traits, such as breasts, hair, genital areas, all of those. Women start to have what we call longer muscular fibers. Men tend to start developing short muscular fibers, and all of those different traits, okay? All right, so that's biological maturation. The other concept comes into cognition and socio-emotional development, and this is psychological maturation, okay? Psychological maturation is best described by this analogy, okay? Let's say it's Friday and you have a power bill that's due on, let's say, next Tuesday. All you have is $50, and next payday isn't until the following Friday. So you have $50, that's all you have. And let's say your power bill is $50, okay? And it's due this coming Tuesday. But you're at the mall and there is this very awesome shirt that you look great in, and that shirt is $50, okay? You can imagine the psychologically matured person would put the shirt back up on the hanger and go pay their power bill. They would look into the future and say, I have this responsibility and I need to take care of that, okay? The psychologically immature mind would buy the shirt and just say, I'll figure out how to pay the power bill later, okay? All right, so that's kind of the analogy of the difference between psychological maturation, okay? So let's talk about some differences that we're seeing. Let's say if you took this class, I got to do more math every year. If you took this class 40 or 50 years ago, okay, psychological and physical maturation would be about the same age. Okay, it'd be around 12, 13, 14 years of age. It'd be basically the same. But what we have seen over the decades is a diversion of these things, okay? Currently today, on average, the average person psychologically matures at around the age of 27, okay? And what we're seeing with physical maturation is that the age is getting younger and younger and younger. It used to be around 13, 14. At one point, it was actually 16. And then went to 12 to 13, and then 11 to 12. Right now, we're sitting around 9, 10 to 11, okay? And in fact, there's actually even a little bit of a wider range. We're actually seeing some girls have their first menstruation at the age of 5, okay? When I worked in sexual abuse, the youngest pregnant child that I worked with, she was at the age of 18 when she was impregnated. Age 8 when she was impregnated. She had her first child at the age of 9. Okay, so we're seeing physical maturation getting younger and younger, but psychological maturation getting older and older and older. Okay, and in fact, there's even a gender difference in psychological maturation. We see measured by the ability to be independent, take care of yourself, live without parental support, do that analogy that I just talked about. There is a gender difference. We see women basically psychologically maturating around the age of 21. That's when we can see most women are capable of living on their own, taking care of their own stuff, taking care of their own business. And men are getting older. They're at the average age is around 34 for most men, when they're actually able to live on their own, independent from their family. It's so, and hence the average age is 27, okay, for everyone. So we see women, so we're seeing this big divergence in gender. And so question for you, because the truth is this has been occurring over the last few decades. We're not quite sure why it's happening, but those people online, you guys here in class, you can put it in the chat, or you guys can just say out loud, why do you think it is that in our society right now, especially here in the United States, we're physically maturing younger and younger and younger, but we're psychologically maturing older and older and older? Why do you all think that is?
What we see on the internet, what's like showing.
Internet?
Yeah, exactly.
What we're exposed to. Here, put up the chat.
What I was thinking is that like because we live in a society that we're exposed to so much stuff now. Like they have murder scenes, sex scenes, and all of these other like very vulgar things on TV these days that we tend to, I think, it causes some kind of reaction toward us in that way. It ends up causing an effect in us to develop a lot faster when we should be exposed to this later in life.
Okay, so culture, society has changed a lot. Okay, why do you think we're psychologically maturing later?
What does that mean?
So like I said, the analogy I used about the t-shirt and the power bill, or the fact that, again, I'll use the gender difference, that the ability to live on one's own independent of their family. Why is that getting older and older and older? Why do y'all think that?
Could it be possible that more children are being raised in one family homes, and they're pretty much kind of left to themselves, as we're not so much giving more proper teachings or more attention to the children, that as we see, like, the school systems, there's a disparity in the teaching and the teachers and some of the fundings, that children aren't being as nurtured as much psychologically and then physically, because of maybe all the hormones and pesticides that we're putting in all our foods. Just a thought.
Those are some great thoughts. So even with the physical maturation and stuff, remember, we're talking about the interaction. So a lot have argued that maybe it's where we develop in, right? So for example, we're becoming more and more urban. And the thing we've known for a very long time is the more rural you live, the later onset of puberty. The more urban you are, the earlier onset of puberty. And some sociologists, to your point, have looked at, especially, for example, single mother homes. In the research that sociologists have done, they found that single mothers fully admit, I know how to raise a strong, independent girl. I don't know how to raise a strong, independent boy. And those are the things that we see in the divergence between women being able to be independent by the age of 21 versus boys who tend to be independent around the age of 34, is that difference in parenting between boys and girls. And in fact, we'll actually, near the end of this, look at a video that is called The Demise of Guys, where we see, and I think I've mentioned this in this class before, that we're seeing kind of this shift in gender roles and everything, which we'll talk about, to where boys are failing at large rates and women are becoming more and more successful. So we'll look at that. And Mercedes, I think you're right. We cater to one gender more than the other, and there's more expectations. So you're all kind of on the same line, but the thing that I would like to say is that I would love to give the scientific answer behind this. We have some guesses, we have some little bit of research, like I talked about with the sociology studies and whatnot, but we really have not, from at least the scientific community, really nailed down why we're seeing these changes. With physical maturation getting younger, psychological maturation getting older, and going to the gender differences, we're not understanding why there's such a gender difference in psychological maturation. We have some ideas, but we haven't answered that question. So there's a good dissertation for some of you who are interested in these topics someday. So, but this again, coming back to this example, this is an example of the interaction between biology, our socio-emotional world. So some of you meant our food, processed food, GMOs, all of those can be influential on our physical development. Expectations for different genders when we look at psychological maturation. And some of you had mentioned information on the cognitive level. There's so much more to learn out there that maybe we're not developing as quickly because there's much more that we need to experience. So, and I noticed that in the chat as well. So, but that's another example of the interaction between these three dynamics and why it kind of can get kind of complex when it comes to human development. Okay. All right. So when we usually look at biological processes, we look at nature versus the nurture argument that we talked about earlier. So we want to know how the environment influences our biological processes. For example, as our brain develops between the age of 0 to 6. And also kind of genotypes versus phenotypes. Genotypes are physical aspects, phenotypes are psychological aspects of our genetic experience. And we'll spend a lot more time on these a little bit later when we get specific into different developmental phases, but also things like life themes. What is a person genetically and biologically capable of doing. So, but we'll talk, I'll make these a little bit more clear as we move on through talking about these different processes. A good example, though, of how biology influences things like life themes, though, before we move on, is there's another thing that occurs during puberty that is very unique in the process of our human brain and really influences why we're better learners in early childhood, but we're quicker thinkers as we become adults, okay? Is that what happens? So we always have seen adolescence as this period of turmoil, of this, rebellion against society, all of this different stuff. And we have always thought it was due to the rush of hormones. So the rush of testosterone in boys and the rush of estrogen in women that makes them, quote unquote, act crazy, okay? But recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking about the last 15 years, we've actually started to change our perception of adolescence as this chaotic turmoil because of hormones and trying to find independence. Is that we found that during period of puberty, and puberty is, just so everybody knows, is actually a 3 to 4 year process. But during that 3 to 4 year period, there's in about 6 months, sometime during that period, our brain goes from partially myelinated to almost completely myelinated. And if you remember what myelination is, it's that fatty little nodes that go on top of a cell that has two purposes: one, to protect the cell, but it speeds up the electrical impulse of the nerve cell. So if you can imagine, within a 6-month period, your brain is going from about 20 miles per hour to about 600 miles per hour. Okay. And what we have found, and again, this is going back to this interaction that we talked about here, okay, is so, you know, when you go to a teen and they did something stupid, and you go and you ask them, why did you do that? Okay. And I remember this very well because I did it. I have no clue. They say, I don't know why I did it. I just did it, right? They have no idea why they did it. And to be truthful, they probably don't, because their brain is going so much faster than their mind at this moment, that they're doing behaviors that they haven't actually consciously thought about on a conscious level. So when you go to a teenager who has done something dumb and you ask them, why did you do that? And they say, I don't know, they probably really don't know. Okay. And what we have found, again, going back to this interaction, especially this one right here, is we have found that there's a parenting dynamic that determines whether an adolescent, not all, but on average, the difference between adolescents who have an easy adolescence, they get through it good, versus those who have a rough adolescence. It's really tough on them. And we have found that there's a parenting dynamic to this, okay? So I'll give the example, I'll go back to here. So the two parenting examples are the kiddo does something stupid, and mom and dad, why did you do that? I don't know. Mom and dad go, well, you're an idiot, go to your room, or they spank him, or they say, well, you're stupid. Or they just insult the kid somehow, or just tell them not to do it again, okay? Versus a parent that says, hey, you know, why did you do what you did? And the adolescent goes, well, I don't know. And so the parent actually sits down with the adolescents and go, well, let's break it down from beginning to end. And they work out the scenario with the teen, okay? We find that that parenting difference really does influence whether an adolescence will have an easy adolescence versus a rough adolescence. In one, the child, the adolescent, I should say, has a harder time understanding why they do things, because all they're doing is being criticized for it or being told that they're stupid. In the other case, they're learning how to slow down their brain. They're learning how to slow down and break things down and figure out why they did what they did. And we find, at least in research, that those two different types of processing, one, the parent slows down their brain and says, let's work through it, versus the other one where the parent just says, you figure it out on your own, basically. And we see those two differences. And then the second question is why do we see this rapid myelination? Well, in early childhood, a slower brain is much better at learning, okay? So when a child comes and they ask the same question over and over and over, that's actually a good thing. It's because that's how they're building those neural connections in their brain, and they'll be stronger, okay? This is why, on average, a child between the age of 0 to 6 will know somewhere between 70 to 90,000 words. I know that's crazy. I don't ever remembering that many words, but that's the average number of words that children by the age of 6 know. And then after that, we start trimming them off to the words that we most commonly know. So I know about 15 now, but we start trimming those off after the age of 6. But in order to learn that many words, you have to have a slower brain, okay? It can't be going 400 miles per hour. But as we grow older, and we can go to this analogy, there's a car coming at you at 50 miles per hour. It's an advantage to have a myelinated brain because you'll jump out of the way. But if you have an unmyelinated brain, you're going to stand there and kind of go, well, should I move, or is it going to move forward? And you'll sit there and question it, right? Hence, the job of a parent is to make sure their kids get out of the way of a car, right? And so that's the reason why we think the brain doesn't become fully myelinated until we start to become physically maturated, because that slower brain is much better at learning, okay? And Candace, yes, it is much like your analogy she put. Is it the kind like authoritative versus authoritarian parenting, where the authoritarian just punishes, authoritative kind of works through with the child? Yes, that's a good example, and we'll get to those soon. So, all right. So those are biological processes and the interaction, why they're important. All right. So let's go back to this guy. So when we're talking about psychological theories, developmental theories, they're usually put in stages, meaning that we have what are called stage theories, where one developmental phase has to be achieved before the child can get into the second developmental phase and into the third developmental phase. And the person that we see that gave us our first psychological theory of development, but also gave us this concept, stage theories, is Sigmund Freud. Okay, and just as a review, we talked about his theory at the beginning of the semester. He's the person that believed highly in the unconscious. That he developed his theory based on individuals who had mental illness or sexual assault victims or criminally minded. I mentioned that, let me back up just a little bit just to kind of give a review of his theory. Remember, Freud was the gentleman who was actually a neuroscientist in the beginning. He was very much trained in the scientific fields. I believe his doctoral dissertation had to do something with the nervous system of a frog. But because he was Jewish, he wasn't allowed to become part of the academia. He wasn't allowed to go and practice science. So what he ended up doing is he ended up finishing his doctorate degree to become a medical doctor. He became a physician and a psychiatrist, specifically combining his knowledge of neuroscience with his knowledge of medicine. And so he became a medical individual, but he was still highly interested in mental life. He was still highly interested in the science. And so he wanted to develop a scientific theory of the mind. Probably, and for those who are interested in the helping fields like social work, counseling, psychotherapy, this is really where your roots kind of started, because he's going to be in a formalized way. We've always had different types of counseling in churches and in councils and those types of things, but he's going to formalize this thing that him and a colleague of him called Dr. Brunner, they're going to call it what's called the talking cure, where they found that just by talking with individuals and getting to the roots of their problem, you can alleviate whatever symptoms they have. Okay. But just so everybody knows, because this gets a little bit strange, his theory, he meant to say that everybody has these things. But remember, when you're thinking about Freud, he developed his theory by working on people who had mental illness, sexual assault issues, criminally minded individuals. And then he used that subpopulation to say this is how everybody operates, okay? And he's going to argue that we have two basic biological instincts. One is eros, one is thanatos. Eros is the life instinct, thanatos is the death instinct. And he's going to narrow these down to, we have a sexual and aggression, that the things our mind is made up for is these impulses towards sex and aggression, okay? And to further summarize, we can use this iceberg notion where he's going to argue that most of our mind, most of everything that we do is largely due to unconscious desires, okay? And that's where he's going to sit our sexual and aggressive needs, which he's going to call the id, okay? And that we're actually only aware of about 10% of our mental life, okay? And this is what we call the consciousness, all right? But as Freud would say, you know, if the only thing we did was to try to have sex with someone while we're beating up someone next to us, we probably would have not survived long as a species. So the id developed what is known as the ego, okay? And the ego has access to the outside world, to our conscious world. And it is kind of that executor that is trying to satisfy the needs of the id, those sexual and aggressive needs, while also satisfying the social needs, okay? And so what Freud would argue, though, if he was here in any situation, for example, students in a classroom, he wouldn't argue that they're not there to become educated people, to become smarter, to be those. No, what he would say is that we're all sitting in class with our notebooks on, dressed appropriately and nicely, because that increases our chances of having sex with someone else later on. Okay, that would be Freud's pure theory. It would change over time with neo-Freudians that would de-emphasize sex and aggression, but that's kind of Freud's idea, okay? So just kind of keep in mind as a review, Freud's theory is based on the unconscious, and it's our unconscious processes that drive most of our behaviors, and our main drives are sex and aggression. Okay. Based on this, and probably after he smoked a little bit too, well, he didn't smoke it, he snorted a little bit too much crack and cocaine, he decided he needed a developmental theory, because what he noted is in the counseling setting, they would always go back to childhood as the source of somebody's trauma or the source of someone's mental illness. So he felt that early childhood was an important period of development where people would either develop psychosis later in life, or they would be able to live healthy. Now, surprisingly, before I change the slide, Freud actually did not want his developmental theory to be a sexual theory. But because he had already been committed to his theory about people existing for just sex and aggression, he had to base his child development theory in sexuality. So his first theory is what's called a psychosexual theory of development, okay? And what he's going to argue is at each level of development, the child either gets stuck in that developmental phase or successfully controls themselves in that phase and is able to successfully move on. And he's going to base each phase on a time period where the child is getting the most pleasure, what he calls the pleasure principle, okay? And so if you think about it, the first place that we receive pleasure is through ingesting or drinking from a bottle. Our lips, our oral area is our first sensation area, because that's where we get nutrition through either the mother's breast or through formula. And so Freud believed that the first stage of development is what's called the oral phase of development. Okay, now people who are able to start to control their need for oral stimulation, they successfully transition and move on. But someone who becomes orally fixated gets stuck in the oral phase. And what he argued, well, I'll give an example of him. He actually felt that he was stuck in the oral phase of development, because from about the age of like 10 to 12 on, he constantly had to have a cigar in his mouth. In fact, he died of jaw cancer because of his cigar smoking. And so what he believed is people who stuck on the oral phase of development constantly needed to consume. And so he believed that things like obesity was caused by being fixed in the oral phase. Things like addictions, the need for ingestion of substances was due to a person being stuck in the oral phase of development. Okay. Now, one of the things that we should note is that while a lot of his stuff does not have sustenance in science, in fact, much of his theory can't be proven scientifically, it has had a huge impact on culture. Okay, is that there is a huge popular assumption that obesity is because of overconsumption of food. That's a Freudian notion that even drives health industry, it drives medicine, and the solution to weight loss is the assumption that you have to start eating less. Okay, but that actually is false. That's not scientifically proven. What actually drives obesity is metabolism. And there's people with fast metabolic systems and there's people with slow metabolic systems. And it is actually the metabolic system that drives obesity, not how much someone consumes. Okay. Probably a good example of this is me and my brother. My brother is a toothpick, but he'll go to McDonald's and eat 5 Big Macs and not gain a pound. I go and eat one and I'm putting on 2 or 3 pounds. But the difference between us is not the amount we consume, because he consumes a lot more than I do. It's that he has a much faster metabolic system than I do. Okay. But this idea that a person is quote unquote fat because they eat too much, that's Sigmund Freud. That's not science. Okay, so I'm bringing this up because in the next phase, we're going to learn about another social thing that we often use. Because what Freud is going to argue, and we'll end with this one and we'll do the other 3 phases on Monday, is the next phase of development, he argued, is the anal phase of development. Okay, if we were to celebrate certain periods of life, okay, I always felt, and we should even give certificates for this, I believe, is potty training. Okay. Now, we don't think of it as very significant as adults because we're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. You know, you wouldn't want to be wearing a diaper in class, right? And so it seems like a very simple process. Okay. But I want you to think about what potty training requires of a little child. Okay. One, it's going to be the first time probably that we're going to give in to the demands of an authority figure. We're going to give in to the demands of society that says it's inappropriate to defecate and urinate whenever you want and to have someone else clean it up after you. Okay. So it's going to be the first time that we're really going to be invested into the demands of our social authority world. The second thing that, if you think about it, that potty training requires is it requires us to take control of our inner biological processes and to say, I'm not going to defecate now. I'm going to wait until I'm in the right place and in the right time. And so it's an internal control thing. Okay. Now, what Freud argued is if a child is unsuccessful with a potty training, they don't always get a hold of it and grasp of it, they get stuck in the anal phase. Okay. And in order to deal with that being stuck in the anal phase, what they do is, because they can't have complete internal control of themselves, they take excessive control of their exterior environment. Okay. And this is, again, going back to popular culture, this is the notion of why we call some people anal. If you've ever called a person anal, it's because they're usually exerting way too much control over everyone else, over their environment. They're the person with the shoes that are perfectly done, their clothes are perfectly laundered. Those are people we call anal. Okay. So next time you come across somebody that you think is being too anal with themselves, just remember you're being Sigmund Freud because he believed it was because they couldn't take control of their internal biological world. So, but that is where the term "that person is anal" comes from. Okay. All right. I'm actually going to stop here because the next phase gets a little bit strange from Freudian perspective, but it does have some precedence in real life. So I want to make sure we spend a little bit of time with it. So we'll leave the phallic stage for Monday. But again, from our discussion today in these first two stages, the important thing about Freud's theory is it's setting up stage theory, that there's one process that you have to successfully get through that sets you up to be successful in the next process. The other thing that I want everybody to note is that sometimes we put things out there that may not be scientifically valid, but it does have an impact on our social life. For the example, the assumption that obesity is caused by overconsumption, and that a person who is anal and wants a lot of control in their life is because they couldn't control their bowels when they were young. So that's where we're at right now. Is there any questions from today? Isabel, did I see that you have your hand up? Is it from earlier or do you have a question?
I'm so sorry. It was from earlier.
Okay, all right. Is there any other questions from today's discussion so far? All right. All right, thanks for that feedback, Candace. It is interesting stuff, I agree. It's my favorite section. So, all right, unless there's any other question, let's go ahead and get out of here for today and we'll finish those last two Freudian stages and start on our next theory this coming Monday.
Oh, wait, Dr. Peterson.
Yes.
I'm so sorry, but the quiz, I forgot. I don't know if you touched on that in the beginning of class, but were we still having a quiz?
Yeah, Isabel, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to post the study guide tomorrow, and then the quiz will be open all next week.
Okay.
And as I discussed at the beginning of class, is that from here on out, we're going to have just like 4 or 5 question short quizzes at the end of each week, just so that I know where everyone is at, and just in case I need to go back and cover any information that no one understands. And then we'll have another final. The midterm and the final will only be like maybe 20 to 25 questions.
Okay, and is that also including with the reflection as well, with the quiz included now? Will we still be doing reflections as well?
I think instead of doing the reflections, we'll just do that 4 or 5 question little quizzes instead of the reflections.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, here's the attendance sheet.